has come to our family.
I'm Reginald Giggington, and you can call me Reggie, and today we'll be continuing our painting journey through the miniatures of the Darkest Dungeon board game by Mythic Games. Today we're going to be doing another boss. This character is originally featured in the Crimson Court DLC, but in the board game has been made into the 4th Ruins boss. The villainous Fanatic takes his righteous zeal and casts it into a violent hatred towards your band of adventurers, ready and willing to burn them at the stake in the name of the light. He's a pretty intricate model with a lot of fun details, plus he has his Pyre with him, which we'll be covering in the second half of this video, so let's dive right in. We're going to start with the skin and the robes. For the skin, we're using Bugman's Glow all over. For the robes, the Fanatic wears a pretty generic looking friar's habit, which we can do an all over coat of charred brown for. Now the Fanatic wears a sort of vest, which I believe is meant to be a brigandine gambizon armor, essentially heavily padded cloth used to soften the impact of weapon strikes. It's a surprisingly realistic choice of armor for a priest who likely can't afford something like plate armor, and must make do with a cheap but effective option. We're going to be applying a coat of Rakarth flesh all over it, plus the stakes on his left bracer. At the same time, we're also doing his hair using Dawnstone, which is a light gray that we can work up to an off-white later. The next step is going to involve two reds, Corn Red and Mephiston Red. For the Corn Red, we're applying it to the handle of his hammer and the book on his belt. Then, for the Mephiston Red, we're going to very carefully apply it to every other stripe on his vest, starting at the direct center and going outwards from there. Be sure to use the natural sculpting of the model to guide your lines and prevent spilling over, but if you do, you can touch up any mistakes with Rakarth flesh. He also has some good old-fashioned purity seals around his chest, attached to his stole. Luckily, I just so happen to collect and paint Dark Angels, so I have a lot of experience with purity seals. We're going to paint the wax stamps with Corn Red for now. Let's do our metallics now. Surcoat Silver is going to go on the metal elements like the shoulder pad, the hammer head, and the pommel. Then Retributor Armor is going on the gold details, the reliquary on his back, the neck of the hammer, the plate on its head, the chain around his belt, and the buckle on his book. For his stole, the purity seals, and the pages of his book, we're going to apply Wraithbone, which is the perfect bone white of fresh parchment. We're going to add some depth and richness now with some wash and contrast. The robes are getting an all-over coat of Cygor Brown, which is going to deepen the shadows. The skin, naturally, is getting a flesh wash, the steel, his hair, and his jacket are getting a black wash, and lastly, I'm mixing up some brown wash to use on the garlic, the stole, the book pages, any gold elements, the stakes on his arm, and the purity seals. Now things are looking a lot better, but he still has plenty of highlighting left to do. We're bringing back Charred Brown to do the highlights on his robes, and then we're going to do a very light dry brush and edge highlight of Steel Legion Drab. Now, because we just finished doing our lovely washes all over everything, be very precise and very careful with your dry brush, since you don't want to accidentally tarnish the nice metallics of the jacket or skin. The next step is going to involve the jacket. In the original art, there's a red tint to his jacket stripes, but it's not actually red. So we're going to highlight it similarly to how we did long ago with the Bounty Hunter's Gambesson, using tan. Also, for the purity seals, we're doing an O-shaped ring on the raised edge using corn red. At the same time, let's edge highlight the book on his hip, also using corn red. We're going to return some vibrancy to his metallics using Retributor armor once more, applied as an edge highlight on the gold elements. On his book, do a little dot on each corner representing the metal caps used to protect the binding. At the same time, we're also going to apply the text to his purity seals and his stole. Now, for this, we're using Doom Death Black, and we're looking for the finest brush we have. And we're just going to do very, very fine wavy black lines going across the page. Every once in a while, leave a little break, as if it's the end of a paragraph or a sentence or just some space between two passages. It helps sell that there's actually text written on the parchment, it's just too small to see. His head's looking a little plain, so let's liven it up with a dry brush of Cadian flesh tone all over the top, and a highlight on his face. Be sure to avoid the scar, which we want to have a darker and more raw look than the rest of his skin. Then, we're going to use lines of ghost gray striped onto his hair to give it a more aged white look. It's garlic time. Let's highlight each bulb with a broad highlight of Rakarth flesh, following the lines in the bulb, then a small highlight of Wraithbone on the most upwards-facing parts, where the light would hit. I also realized after this step that I missed an orange stripe running along the edges of his stole, for which I used tan once again, just tracing along the outside edges for each one. Now comes the base and shadows. The Fanatic's large scar will require a thin line of black outlining its shape, but otherwise it's a pretty standard set of shadow placements like we've practiced. With the Fanatic done, we can move on to the Pyre. It's a fair bit simpler, but shouldn't take too much work to bang out. The first step is dry brushing the entire model with Steel Legion Drab. Then, we're doing the bagged person completely in Rakarth flesh. And lastly, the ropes are getting a coat of Steel Legion once again, this time going for full coverage, but avoiding spilling out over onto the Rakarth flesh. The wood should already have some texture to it thanks to Steel Legion, but we're going to bring it down to a brown color using Wildwood. In truth, you could use Cygor Brown here if you don't want to buy two different but similar looking brown contrast paints, and it wouldn't be noticeably different. But I went with Wildwood because it's slightly lighter. Now we're going to dry brush Steel Legion Drab a second time. This time the wood has a lovely natural brown to it, with some definition thanks to that first dry brush. But with a second one, we can boost the visual contrast between the darker and lighter parts and really highlight the shapes and textures. We're also going to black wash the ropes and the bagged person at the same time. The flames are the next step. We're going to be using Gold Yellow, the aptly named Flame Orange, and Evil Sun's Scarlet. Now, these sorts of bright colors directly over black typically aren't a good decision, but the fire is going to be so visually busy and have so many different hues and shifts and colors that you really don't need to worry too much about how good your coverage is. I start with an orange all over, and then a super thinned Evil Suns towards the top half of each lick of flame, and then Gold Yellow as an edge highlight wherever there are edges to be found. The flame is going to get one last touch with a very thinned corn red applied to the tips of each lick to give the appearance of it darkening as it gets further away from the wood. We're also going to dry brush Flash Gets Yellow on the bottom half of each horizontal band on the bagged body. As you can see, it's separated into roughly 3 bands thanks to the placement of the ropes. This dry brush will give it the appearance of the fire glowing and casting light on the undersides of each part. And of course, we round out with the shadows in the base, like always. The fire and the wood don't need any shadows, but the fabric can always use a few lines following the molded details. With the pyre done, the Fanatic joins it, and we have all the pieces ready for another fantastic boss fight. He was a lot of fun to paint thanks to his intricate little details, and it was fun getting to leverage some skills I learned painting Warhammer into painting Darkest Dungeon minis. Plus, we got a glimpse of the potential of OSL, Object Source Lighting, with the flames and the casted light. It's a powerful technique that we just barely dipped our toes into, but if you study it and master it, you can create some incredible effects. I look forward to seeing you all improve and learn on your own painting journeys. In the meantime, have fun painting your Darkest Dungeon miniatures, and feel free to tag me on Instagram, @ReggieGick, to show me how yours turn out. Links to my affiliated socials can be found in the description. Feel free to subscribe or like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon with another painting tutorial.